Monday, Count Corla, of this week. On Monday of this week, there were 37 cases in the High Court brought by banks, building societies, for repossession of homes. And if there were 37 that actually appeared in court, I think it is fair to assume that there are probably several hundred where homes were repossessed without actually having gone into court. Meanwhile, we have a report published yesterday by the Department of the Environment that the number of people on council housing lists has now increased by 30%, and now 60,000, almost 60,000 people on council housing waiting lists. A 30% increase in the 3 years up to March of this year. In other words, in the 3 years before the big job losses, etc., started to happen. Incidentally, the 3 best years for house building in the country, when one would have expected a significant return of houses under Part 5 to local authorities. 30% increase in the number of people on council waiting lists. Now, Count Corla, this is probably the biggest social ticking time bomb in this country. If 2008 was the year that saw huge numbers of people losing their jobs, 100,000, 2009 is shaping up to be the year when people's homes are going to be repossessed. And there's already evidence of cases queuing up and stacking up, being brought by the building societies and agencies against people to put them out of their home. Now, Count Corla, it doesn't have to be like that. There are ways in which arrangements can be made that for the period of the recession, might be 2, 3, 4 years, that people can at least stay in their own home. The biggest fear people have, even bigger than losing their job, is the fear of losing their home. And it's crazy, because what's going to happen is you're going to have banks and building societies repossessing homes. They can't sell them in this market, and even if they do sell them, they're not going to be selling them for what the house was bought for. The family concerned is going to end up on a council housing list, being allocated a house at some stage by a local authority, or being paid rent allowance to rent a home somewhere else. Now, Count Corla, I want to ask the Taoiseach, is the government going to come up with some approach which will ensure that people can stay living in their own homes so that they get through the 2 or 3 or 4 difficult years, and they'll end up, the people whose homes are being repossessed now are people who are going to be back on their feet again in a couple of years' time. And all that this requires is an arrangement whereby the mortgage is suspended, maybe rent allowance is allowed to be applied to the home that people are living in, maybe the mortgage interest subsidy, the rules of which haven't been changed for some time, maybe that can be changed. Maybe shared equity can be applied through local authorities. But there is a need, Taoiseach, for an arrangement to be put in place that assures people that they can stay living in their own home, and that arrangements are made either through the state or with the lending agencies, that we're not going to see through 2009, as it's looking like it's going to happen, a whole slew of people being taken into court to have their homes repossessed, being put out of one home, and then having to be effectively paid by the state to go and live somewhere else. Well, Count Corla, with respect, I think that's a commentary by the Taoiseach on what is happening. I mean, the codes of practice that the Taoiseach refers to were drawn up for normal times. These aren't normal times. We have a lot of people now, Taoiseach, who have lost their jobs over the course of the last year. Many more of whom are faced with losing jobs and businesses, and they're stuck with mortgages that in many cases they can't afford to pay. First of all, your mortgage subsidy scheme needs to be updated. Under the present rules, if you have a couple and one of them is working 30 hours a week, they don't get the mortgage subsidy, even though the income that they're earning from their work might be very low. That needs to be revised. Telling people, there's a certain irony here, Taoiseach, in saying that people can go to MABs and that there's 53 MABs offices throughout the country. I don't know whether you recall, But your Minister for Finance announced in the budget that MABS was going to be absorbed into the community information centres. It's one of the state agencies, of all of the things that the government chooses to decide that it's going to exercise some rationalisation on, the very agencies that people who are now in trouble need to have access to. That's what you've decided to amalgamate and to emasculate. I'm not asking you, Taoiseach, about you asking the banks and the building societies to change their codes of practice at the moment. I'm asking you, on behalf of the government, to take action, to bring before the House, to get your Minister for Housing or Minister for the Environment or Minister for Social and Family Affairs to bring a scheme before the House which will ensure and provide a guarantee for families that they're not going to lose their home. There's no point in saying to families, well, take your chances with the court. I mean, some of these building societies, these start mortgage people, for example, are now charging, people end up paying sometimes now more in legal fees to defend the court action that's being taken against them for repossession than the amount of their arrears on the mortgage. There's a real problem out there, Taoiseach. It is beginning to surface through the courts. There is evidence that a lot of it is backing up, and we're going to see an awful lot more of this in 2009. This isn't a problem that the government needs to come back to next year saying there is emergency action we have to take. This is a problem that's staring you in the face for 2009, and I'm saying to you now that there are things that you can do now. There are actions that the government can take now to avoid and prevent the pain that families will have to endure if they're facing home repossession in 2009. You can change your housing policies, you can change the mortgage subsidy arrangements, you can change the rent allowance arrangements, you can enter into an arrangement with the banks for whom you're providing a guarantee that they will provide a suspension of mortgages to people who find themselves in trouble and bridge themselves over the 2 or 3 year period so that they can get back on their feet. This makes sense economically, financially, it makes sense for the state, it makes sense for the lending agencies, and it certainly makes sense for the families concerned. It is something that government can do now. It's not something that the Taoiseach appears to be saying, well, we're going to leave it to the lending agencies and we'll provide some encouragement for them, and if somebody gets into trouble they can go to a MABS office that's likely to be closed down sometime next year anyway.
Right.